Whether you get your agenda in January or September, they can be kind of boring. So let's liven them up by giving them some personality with a favorite quote or something to make it personal and special to you. I went to my local store and craft store, office supply store, and got a few different agendas because I wanted to show you what you should look out for an agenda if you plan on doing some lettering or design on it. I'm going to be doing a design with heat embossing, and I'm going to do another one that is with an acrylic or oil-based paint marker. Either one of those will work really well. But there are some surfaces that are a lot trickier to get your design on without it getting ruined eventually, because your agenda is going to be thrown in and out of your bag, it's going to be sitting all over, and you don't want to always have to be worrying about making sure that it stays perfect. So the first one that I got is a plastic cover agenda, and well, it's really nice, and I thought, oh, this will be so cute, I can write in the lines. This plastic is completely smooth. It has no porous nature to it or anything, so I know that if I write on it, it's going to scratch off really easily. So I thought, well, what about embossing? Perfect. What do you think is going to happen to plastic if you heat it up with an embossing gun? That's right, it is going to melt. So when you pick your agenda, if it is plastic and it's a smooth, non-porous plastic, probably not the best idea for creating a design that's going to last. Throw that one to the side. I also found a plastic one that has a more textured cover, but it also has an interior page so that this plastic cover can protect a design. So I've decided I'm going to do a design on here, and because it's a thick, just basic paper, I can heat emboss on this. Paper, good for heat embossing. Plastic, not so much. And then I found this faux leather, super faux leather cover, which I know will be really, really good with some oil-based markers or acrylic-based markers. So I'm going to draw a design directly onto this cover. I've done some covers like this in the past, and though it is a plastic cover, the texture that they give to it and how it's a little bit porous will help the design last over time. Because I get really nervous about putting a final design onto something right away, I always like to do lots of sketches first. I did that. I did some sketches for some designs, and I decided to do work hard, be kind for one agenda, and then I'm going to personalize the other one for one of my friends with her name and then another quote around the top. And because I don't want you to have to start from scratch, I am giving you this work hard, be kind design in 3 different sizes so that you can transfer it to your agenda cover. And then I've also created just the external portion of this one, Another Day, Another Dream, with the year, which of course can easily be changed, and then a space for you to write your name. So I've put her name in here in the space, and I just filled in the rest of that circle there. Just put a little bit more of a line, and I'm going to use these as my tracers for my final piece. Let's get working on the final agendas. Now, I know what I'm like with embossing powder. Messy. So I'm going to do that one last. I'll put that to the side, and I'm going to get started on this faux leather plastic cover that I'm going to do with my pens. So I will be using the Moltov pens, and these ones I'm using the 1.5 millimeter tip. They're really nice because they're an acrylic based pen, but they're very nice and opaque. There's also the liquid chrome option, which I'll be using for the writing outside, and then I'm going to use some colors for the name in the middle to really make it pop off the page. You could use just 2 colors, so another option that I have is the Sharpie oil-based markers or the Craft Smart oil-based markers, and those ones will also work really nicely on a cover like this. They have good adherence and they'll stick to the texture that's on the cover. Now make sure whatever pen you're using, you do take the time to shake it because it will make a difference in the flow, and it will also make a difference in the opacity of the paint. If it's a metallic or a white, you want to make sure that it's nice and opaque and it has that beautiful metallic color right away, or that nice thick white right away. I'll take my own advice and actually shake it. Now, in order to use this as a tracer, I can't really put it underneath, but what I can do and what I love to do is take a really, really hard pen, so something like a 4H or a 3H or a 5H or a 6H, just one of those high number H's, and I will actually trace the design to get a bit of an indent on my cover down below. First, I'm going to make sure that it is centered, or centered enough. After I've made sure that this is perfectly centered, I like to put a bit of tape onto it. I just fold over a touch, put some tape there. That way while I'm tracing, it's not going to shift at all. Putting lots of pressure on my pencil, I'm going to trace over the entire design. And if you go slightly off, don't worry about it. You can always go back and adjust that when you're putting your actual ink to the agenda. After you've gone through, pressed hard and traced the whole design, you can take the paper off to see what it looks like. And I mean, it's probably looks like there's nothing there, but there's a little bit of an indent. So what I like to do is take my pencil, and if I'm feeling at all iffy about the indent, I'll go through and just give myself some rough pencil marks to be able to follow. All right, so tracing over it, those dents with pencil, just has allowed me to feel a little bit more confident about the design. And it can be hard to see in the light because it's pencil on gray, but if I just shift it slightly, then I can see the gleam of where the pencil is. So that will give me a guideline for my tracing. I'm going to use a liquid chrome pen, and this one has not the 2mm tip, shaking the wrong one. This one also, what? This one. 1mm tip. The 2mm tip is just way too thick for this. So I'm going to use the 1mm tip, which is really nice and pointy. And now because there is a bit of a texture on the book, it's going to be a touch more difficult to draw on than usual. So I'm going to make sure that I am just doing a little bit at a time and going really, really slowly. Writing on a final piece, you want to keep in mind that you can always go back and add, but you can't quite so easily go and take something away. So go slowly, add just a little bit at a time, and make changes very delicately. Don't do a huge change. If it's a huge change, you might want to go back to the design board. One other thing that I like to watch out for is to make sure that I'm not sticking my hand into the wet ink. So you can take another piece of paper and rest your hand on that page, or you can always just wait until it's nice and fully dry, which is probably a better option. But when you're pressed for time because you know your kids are about to come running into the room because they've realized that you're not paying attention to them every single minute of every single day, so they're either doing something really naughty or they're about to come jump on you, you get used to not listening to your own rules. So I'm making a slight adjustment because I had drawn my R too close, but I do those ever so slight adjustments just to make sure that the design still makes sense and still looks good. But I won't do large adjustments, like I wouldn't write a different name on here without first going back to the drawing board and making sure that I have it exactly as I'm going to want it on my final piece. Another day, and then I'm going to do another dream on the bottom. But I know it's not dry yet. I really like that this silver pen makes it not too obvious, but it has this beautiful shine and it almost matches the design of the brand up here. And now I'm going to take another color pen to make the name lettering pop. Now, when I wrote the name lettering on here, I didn't trace the outside of each of these because that would just be so much to trace. So instead, I just did the line on the inside and I can thicken it up as I do my final piece. Again, you want to make sure that the rest of your design is all dry so that you're not going to be smudging it with the side of your hand. Sometimes I like to do just a quick little test, especially if you have moisturizer on your hands. That can affect the paint if it's not fully dry. Even if I'm going to be thickening up a letter, I first like to draw the entire thing in so that I can see how the letters are placed next to one another, and that'll show me where I should add the thicks so that I'm not always putting them on one side with a few letters clumping. I'll show you what I mean. When I'm tracing something, I always like to have my original design beside, just because that gives me another reference point to be able to make sure that I get it exactly where I want it. So if I was to put the thick line to the O on this side and then the thick line to the M on this side, these two letters are going to end up too close together. I want to make sure that the spacing stays relatively consistent, and I'm kind of noticing actually that my O and my M are closer together than my other letters. So I'll add thickness to this side of that stroke of the M, and I'll add my thickness to this part of the O. Even though I've added thickness, I've kept them as far apart as possible just by being strategic by the side which I added that monoline thickness to. Of course, if you have a thicker pen, you're probably not even going to have to add the thickness because it will already be added on there for you just by the pen nib. If you want your stroke to look like it was a monoline with a thicker pen, you need to make sure that every single part of your line has that additional thickness. So even these little cross bits of the O, that needs to be just as thick as the rest of the body. This is a little bit different than when you're doing your brush lettering, when you want downstrokes to be thicker. And this is just another style of lettering that you can choose to use. I love to have quite a few styles that I can use so that I can switch it up if I'm feeling bored of one style or if I feel like it's just not really suiting the design that I'm trying to do. It's great to have a whole bunch of different styles under your belt. So I'm going to add more thickness to this side to try to bring my I and my M a little bit closer so that it's consistent with the rest of the letters in the piece. After you've done your full design once over, wait till it dries and then you can go over again and do a second coat to get that really nice opaque paint. When you're going over with the second coat, you want to make sure that you have lots of ink on the end of your pen. Otherwise, it tends to scratch up the paint underneath. So if you have one that you have to press to get more paint, you can just give it a quick pump and then cover up any of those spots that need a little bit more coverage. Once it's dry, I want to be able to add a little bit more of a pop to the lettering by putting a shadow underneath. So I'm not going to use a black shadow because that wouldn't be very obvious. I'll use a white shadow instead. And again, this is a 1mm, so quite a pointy pen, which will give me a nice precise line. I already added my shadow to my draft here to make sure that it would all fit in. And I add a shadow simply by doing a monoline to the right and slightly below each of the different letter areas. I find it really helpful to have a guideline like that, and I'll keep it beside as I transfer my shadow onto my final piece. Again, go nice and slowly, use lots of control. And you want to, with a shadow, try to pay attention to how far away the line is and keep that consistent throughout the entire piece. Now my final addition is the year. I left that until after I did the lettering because I wanted to make sure that if there were slight adjustments from my initial draft to my final piece, that I had enough space for all of my lettering for her name and for all of the shadows underneath. I didn't want it to get bumped into the letters or the numbers from the year. So now I'll write those guys in down below, not with the pointy, not with the dull one. There we go. And then I will be all done, a perfect personalized planner. So that's one all done. Now we'll move on to the paper-based one, which might seem a little bit easier because it is. So this one I'm going to be heat embossing. The materials that I have are this set of Ranger heat embossing pens, and these are the clear set. This set comes with one brush tip and one bullet tip, but because the design I'm going to be doing is pretty delicate, I want to use the bullet tip in order to get the really, really fine lines. So I've opened up a new pack, so I have a clean, brand new bullet tip. My other one was a little bit smushy. Now, obviously, this is too large for the size and the space that I have. I'm going to trim it off with the world's tiniest scissors. This will help me make sure that I put it centered and straight onto my agenda. Now, the other thing that I want to pay attention to is that I want to have not just the letters be centered, but also the flourishing. So I like to look at the letters itself. So from the letter body to the edge is 3.5. From this letter body to the edge, sort of from that edge, is just under. And I think it's a little bit angled. Let's do a straight line on the bottom. And then I'm going to make sure that my straight line on the bottom of my letters up to the edge is the same distance on each side. So now I have it mostly straight, relatively centered, and I want to make sure that my letters are the same from the top to the bottom. So I've got about 4 centimeters there, 4 centimeters there. Pretty good for eyeballing. Now again, I'm going to tape it down. The really nice thing about doing this on a paper is that when I do that tracing with my really hard pencil, or you can always use a pen. I like to save a pen that the ink has run out. I know that's weird, a ballpoint pen, but that gives me really nice compression marks. So you'll get the little indents, and on paper, you'll see it super clearly. So trace over your whole design using a good amount of pressure, and that will give you a clear indent to be able to trace with your embossing pen. You end up with nice clear compression marks underneath that you can then trace over with the embossing pen. Now, before you do embossing, I suggest going over this with some sort of anti-static, either a little bag that you've made or a fabric softener sheet, because that will just help to repel some of the static. I also have a bit of moisturizer on my hands, and that oil will cling to some of the embossing powder that I'm going to be using. So I want to make sure that I give it a good wipe down with a microfiber, then I'll give it a wipe down with a fabric softener sheet, and then ready to emboss. Now my agenda is going to smell spring fresh, so that's perfect. All right, with my brand new bullet tip, that's the brush tip, I'm going to trace over all of those indents that I put onto the book, but I also am going to keep, yeah, that's right, I need to roll up the sleeves for this, but I'm also going to keep my tracer right beside so that I have that to refer to. All right, let's get this happening. Because the pen will dry, I want to do just a little bit at a time. So I'll do one word, I'll emboss it, and then move on to the next one. So I just sprinkled the embossing powder on. I'm using the Stupendous. This is like the aged set, I guess. I really like it because it's mixes, not just one single color. So I'll put that on. I'm going to grab a piece of paper and make sure that it's a clean piece of paper to pour this onto so that I can get it back in the bottle and use it again. I like to give it a little flick just to get the excess off, but not too much of it off. And I'm seeing that I can see quite a bit of marker under here, so just with my hand, I'll sprinkle a little bit of it on to make sure I have good coverage. And now it's time to emboss. On to the next line. I'm going to sprinkle that same powder right back on. And then pour it back off onto the paper. A little flick to get the extra off. And then back to the gun. For my B here, I accidentally got a little bit too close, so I'm just going to clean out some of that powder to be able to get an E showing through. Just shifting the powder away. I'll even clean up, give myself a little more space on the B. Some embossing powders really seem to bleed, and this one is a high bleed embossing powder. So I just want to make sure that I have lots of space so that my letters are really nice and crisp and clean. Fingers crossed. Not terrible. I'm just going to try to push this guy while it's still wet. So hot. Okay, note to self, don't touch embossing powder while it's still melty. I was trying to smooth out the paper. That's one thing about embossing is that if you have thinner paper especially, it does tend to buckle a little bit, but I'm sure that with time and the fact that I have this plastic cover to help weigh it down, it just looks like a beautiful and personalized design for my 2018 planner. Now again, you can use this for a January planner, you can use this for a September planner, or any other book that happens to have a paper or cardboard insert on the front cover. I really like this one because it had this extra plastic protection so that I don't have to worry about my design getting ruined. Or if you find one that is a textured plastic, you can always use an oil-based marker or an acrylic marker in order to be able to get your design on there. I've given you the 2 different tracers that you're more than welcome to use for your own personal use, and this one has a space for you to put your own name in there. So get your agendas, make them a little bit more special than just what they would be from the store. Remember that you're looking for an agenda that has a texture to it or that has a paper so that you can use a pen that will work really well on a paper or a textured plan.